What happens when a legendary actor sits down for what should be a friendly chat and finds himself under attack from a host who seems determined to make him uncomfortable? It only took 45 seconds for things to spiral completely out of control. This is the story of how one television host's shocking behavior led to one of the most dramatic walkouts in daytime television history. The studio lights were bright and warm as McKellen walked onto the Loose Women set. He was there to talk about his latest theater production, a project he was genuinely excited about. The panel consisted of 4 women: Denise Welch, who would be leading the interview, along with Janet Street Porter, Carol McGiffin, and Kay Adams. The audience clapped enthusiastically as Ian took his seat, smiling and waving. Denise started with what seemed like a simple question. She leaned forward in her chair and said, "So, Ian, you are getting on a bit now, aren't you? When do you think you will finally retire from acting?" The other panelists shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Janet looked down at her notes. Carol raised her eyebrows. Kay glanced nervously between Ian and Denise. Ian kept his composure, though you could see a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He smiled politely and replied, "Well, I have no plans to retire anytime soon. I love what I do. Acting keeps me young, actually." Denise did not seem satisfied with this answer. She pressed on, her tone becoming sharper. "But surely, at your age, you must be thinking about slowing down? I mean, can you even remember all your lines anymore?" The audience went quiet. You could hear the awkwardness settling over the studio like a heavy blanket. Janet tried to jump in to change the subject. "Ian, why don't you tell us about the new production? It sounds fascinating." But Denise was not ready to let it go. She waved her hand dismissively at Janet and kept her focus on Ian. No, I want to hear about this. I think our viewers would be interested to know if older actors struggle with memory issues." Ian's smile faded slightly. He straightened in his chair and said with measured patience, "I assure you, my memory is perfectly fine. I have been performing Shakespeare for decades, and those plays have rather a lot of lines, as you might imagine." Kay tried to rescue the situation. "Shakespeare is so wonderful. Ian, what is it about his work that has kept you coming back to it throughout your career?" Before Ian could answer, Denise interrupted again. "Oh, we have all heard about Shakespeare a million times. Let us talk about something more interesting. Ian, you have played some rather flamboyant characters over the years. Do you ever worry that you are too old to be playing these big dramatic roles now? Shouldn't you be thinking about playing grandfathers and that sort of thing?" Carol put her hand on Denise's arm and said quietly, "Denise, maybe we should." Denise pulled her arm away. "I'm just asking honest questions. That is what we do on this show, isn't it?" Ian took a deep breath. His voice remained calm, but you could hear the steel underneath. "I appreciate directness, but I do find it rather curious that you seem more interested in discussing my age than my work. I came here today to talk about theater, about art, about the production we have poured our hearts into." Denise leaned back in her chair with a smug expression. "Well, your age is relevant though, isn't it? You are not exactly a spring chicken. Our viewers have a right to know if you are still up to the job." Janet shook her head in visible frustration. "This is ridiculous. Ian is one of the most respected actors in the world. His age is completely irrelevant." Kay nodded in agreement. "Absolutely. Ian, please, tell us about the production. What drew you to this particular project?" Ian began to speak, grateful for the opportunity to redirect the conversation. "Thank you. Well, it is a modern adaptation of King Lear, and what fascinated me about this version is..." Denise cut him off mid-sentence. "King Lear, isn't that about an old man losing his mind? How perfect for you." The other 3 panelists gasped. Carol said sharply, "Denise, that is completely out of line." Janet stood up slightly from her chair. "You need to apologize right now. This is unacceptable." The audience had gone completely silent. Some people were looking at each other in shock. Others were looking at the floor, embarrassed to be witnessing this. Ian sat very still for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but filled with dignity. "I have been in this industry for over 60 years. I have worked with the finest directors, actors, and writers in the world. I have performed on stages from London to New York to Tokyo. I have dedicated my life to my craft and to making theater accessible and meaningful to people." He paused and looked directly at Denise. "What I will not do is sit here and be insulted by someone who seems to think that age is something to be mocked rather than respected. You have made it very clear that you have no interest in having a genuine conversation." Denise rolled her eyes. Oh, please, do not be so sensitive. I'm just having a bit of fun. Can't you take a joke? Ian shook his head slowly. There is nothing funny about what you have said. You have been rude, dismissive, and frankly, quite cruel. That is not humor. That is just meanness, dressed up as honesty. Kay reached over and touched Ian's hand gently. Ian, we are so sorry. This is not representative of how we normally conduct interviews. Carol added quickly. Absolutely not. Denise is completely out of order. Please know that the rest of us respect you enormously. Janet was visibly angry now. Denise, you owe Ian a massive apology. What you have done here is disgraceful. Denise crossed her arms defensively. I do not owe anyone anything. I was asking legitimate questions. If he cannot handle a bit of directness, maybe he is too delicate for television. That was the breaking point. Ian stood up from his chair with the grace and poise that had defined his entire career. He removed his microphone carefully and placed it on the table in front of him. The studio was so quiet you could hear the tiny thud as it hit the surface. He looked at Kay, Carol, and Janet with warmth in his eyes. Thank you three for trying to make this work. You are professionals and I appreciate your efforts. Then he turned to Denise. His voice was firm but not angry. As for you, I genuinely hope that one day you learn that respect is not something to be dismissed so easily. You might find that treating people with basic human decency actually makes for much better television than whatever this was supposed to be. Denise's face flushed red. She started to say something, but Ian raised his hand gently to stop her. No, I think you have said quite enough for one day, Ian said quietly. I am leaving now. I hope you can reflect on this and perhaps consider how you speak to guests in the future. Janet stood up immediately. Ian, please do not go. We can continue this interview properly. Denise can leave if anyone should. Ian smiled at her kindly. That is very generous of you, Janet, but I think the moment has passed. I would rather leave with my dignity intact than continue in this atmosphere. Carol had tears in her eyes. We are truly sorry, Ian. Please know this is not who we are. Kay nodded emphatically. You deserve so much better than this. Your work speaks for itself, and always has. Ian gave them each a small nod of appreciation. Thank you. That means a great deal. As he turned to walk off the set, the audience began to applaud. It started with just a few people, then more joined in, and within seconds, the entire studio audience was on their feet, giving Ian McKellen standing ovation. The applause was thunderous, filled with respect and support. Denise sat in her chair looking shocked and angry. She glanced around at the audience, clearly not expecting this reaction. She tried to speak over the applause. Oh, come on, this is ridiculous. He is being overdramatic. But nobody was listening to her anymore. The other three panelists were all standing as well, joining in the applause for Ian. Janet looked at Denise with disappointment written all over her face. Carol shook her head slowly. Kay just kept clapping, her eyes following Ian as he made his way toward the exit. As Ian reached the edge of the set, he paused for just a moment. He turned back and gave the audience a gracious wave. The applause grew even louder. People were cheering now, shouting words of support and encouragement. It was clear whose side they were on. Denise tried one more time to regain control of the situation. She raised her voice above the noise. Can we please calm down? He is just one actor. We will get someone else on. Janet whirled around to face her. That is exactly the problem, Denise. You think people are just interchangeable. You think you can treat them however you want and there will be no consequences. Well, look around. This is what consequences look like. The producer in the control room was frantically trying to figure out what to do. The cameras were still rolling. The audience was still applauding. Ian was walking off set with more dignity than most people could muster in their entire lives. And Denise Welch sat there, looking smaller and smaller by the second. Carol leaned over to Denise and said in a low, firm voice, You need to think very carefully about what just happened here. You had one of the greatest living actors sitting right there, and you chose to belittle him instead of celebrating him. That says everything about you and nothing about him, Kay added quietly. We all have to work together on this show. But after today, I honestly do not know how we move forward from this. What you did was unforgivable. Denise looked at her three fellow panelists with a mixture of defiance and something that might have been the first hint of realization that she had made a terrible mistake. You are all overreacting, she said, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Ian had reached the backstage area now. The cameras could no longer see him, but people backstage reported that he remained composed and polite, even thanking the crew members who tried to apologize on behalf of the show. He collected his things quietly and left the building with his head held high. Back on set, the applause was finally beginning to die down. The audience members were sitting back in their seats, but the energy in the room had completely changed. Where there had been excitement at the start of the show, there was now tension and discomfort. Janet looked directly at the camera. Her face was serious, her voice clear and strong. I think we all just witnessed something that should never have happened. Ian McKellen is a national treasure, a brilliant actor, and a wonderful human being. He came here today in good faith to share his work with us, and he was treated appallingly. Carol nodded and added, I want to apologize on behalf of this show to Ian and to everyone watching at home. What happened today does not represent our values or how we normally conduct ourselves. Kay's voice was emotional as she spoke. Ian, if you are watching somehow, please know that you handled that situation with more grace than anyone could have expected. You showed us all what true professionalism and dignity look like. Denise sat silently now. The camera occasionally cut to her face, and viewers could see the wheels turning as she perhaps began to understand the gravity of what she had done. But she said nothing. No apology came. No acknowledgement of her behavior. Just silence. The producer made the decision to cut to a commercial break early. As soon as they were off air, the set erupted in conversation. Crew members were shaking their heads. The floor manager was on the phone with someone, speaking in urgent, hushed tones. The three panelists who had tried to defend Ian were gathered together, talking quietly and looking upset. Denise stood up and tried to walk over to them, but Janet held up her hand. Not now, Denise. Just not now. One audience member was heard saying to her friend, I cannot believe what I just saw. I've been watching this show for years and I have never seen anything like that. That poor man. He was so kind and patient, and she just kept going at him. Another person added, and the way he left, so dignified. He didn't lose his temper or say anything cruel back. He just calmly explained why he was leaving and then walked away. That is class. The makeup artist who had worked with Ian earlier was crying in the corner. She told a colleague, he was so lovely when I was doing his makeup. We talked about theater and his favorite productions. He made me laugh. He asked about my family, and then to see him treated like that. When the show came back from commercial break, the atmosphere was still heavy. The remaining segments felt awkward and strained. Denise tried to act as if nothing had happened, but every time she spoke, her co-panelists would give her cold looks or simply not respond. At one point, a viewer called into the show, something they sometimes did during live broadcasts. The caller said, I just want to say that I think what happened with Ian McKellen was shameful. He is a legend and he deserved respect. I will not be watching this show again until things change. The call was cut off quickly, but the damage was done. More calls started coming in, all saying similar things. The switchboard was lighting up with complaints. Social media, though the panelists could not see it in real time, was exploding with reactions. As the show finally came to an end, Janet gave one final statement. Today was difficult. We had a guest who we should have honored, and instead, he was treated in a way that none of us are proud of. I hope we can all learn from this. The credits rolled, the lights came down, and somewhere in London, Ian McKellen was probably already back to thinking about his theater production, about his lines, about his craft, because that is who he was, a true professional. The incident had lasted only about 15 minutes from start to finish. But those 15 minutes revealed so much about character, about respect, about what happens when someone forgets that fame does not give you the right to treat others poorly. Ian McKellen had come to the show as a guest, an invitation he had accepted graciously. He had every right to expect basic courtesy and respect. Instead, he was met with dismissiveness, mockery, and what could only be described as bullying behavior. But he had also shown everyone watching how to handle such a situation with grace. He had not shouted or made a scene. He had simply stated his boundaries clearly, explained why the behavior was unacceptable, and removed himself from the situation. Denise Welch had entered that interview as a host with power and control. She left it having revealed something much less flattering about herself. Her inability to see Ian as a person deserving of respect, her insistence on mocking his age, her refusal to apologize, All of it painted a picture of someone who had let fame go to her head. The other three panelists had tried their best to salvage the situation. They had attempted to redirect the conversation multiple times. They had stood up for Ian when it became clear that Denise would not back down, and they had joined the audience in showing their support. The standing ovation from the audience was perhaps the most telling moment of all. These were ordinary people who had come to watch a daytime talk show. They had no script, no agenda. They simply recognized when someone was being treated unfairly and chose to show their support. As word of the incident spread, people began to discuss not just what had happened, but why it had happened. What possesses someone to treat a guest with such obvious disrespect? Was it an attempt to create controversy for ratings? Was it personal? Or was it simply a case of someone who had forgotten basic human decency? Whatever the reason, the result was clear. Ian McKellen had walked onto that set as a respected actor coming to promote his work. He had walked off as something more, a symbol of dignity in the face of disrespect, of composure under pressure, of knowing when to stand up for yourself. The incident also raised questions about the culture of daytime television. How much rudeness is acceptable in the name of being direct or honest? Where's the line between asking tough questions and simply being mean? And who decides when that line has been crossed? In this case, Ian McKellen decided, when he felt that the conversation had moved beyond reasonable questioning into personal attacks, he made the choice to leave. He did not owe the show his continued presence. He simply owed himself the respect to not sit there and take it. The crew members who had watched it all unfold would later describe it as one of the most uncomfortable things they had ever witnessed on set. They talked about how Ian had remained so calm throughout, even as Denise kept pushing. They marveled at how he had managed to criticize her without becoming cruel himself. His decision to thank Janet, Carol, and Kay before leaving showed his character. Even in his own moment of being wronged, he had taken the time to acknowledge their efforts to help him. He had recognized their attempts to make the situation better. And his final words to Denise, hoping she would learn from the experience, showed a generosity of spirit that was remarkable. He could have been vindictive. He could have said hurtful things in return. But instead, he had offered her a chance to reflect and grow. The incident lasted only 15 minutes, but those 15 minutes told a complete story. A story about respect and the lack of it. A story about power and how it can be misused. A story about dignity and how it can be maintained even in difficult circumstances. It was also a story about consequences. Denise Welch had thought she could say whatever she wanted without any real repercussions. She had been proven wrong. The immediate consequences were visible, the audience turning against her, her co-hosts distancing themselves, the flood of complaints. But perhaps the most important consequence was simply this. Ian McKellen had walked away. He had shown that no one has to sit and take abuse, no matter who is dishing it out. He had demonstrated that maintaining your dignity is more important than avoiding conflict. For anyone watching who had ever been in a situation where they were disrespected or mistreated, Ian's actions offered a template. You do not have to yell or be cruel in response. You simply have to recognize your worth and remove yourself from the situation if your boundaries are not respected. The standing ovation from the audience was their way of affirming this message. They were telling Ian that standing up for yourself is the right thing to do. They were showing that there is no shame in walking away from a situation where you are not being treated with basic decency. As the dust settled on that remarkable day, one thing was clear. Ian McKellen had emerged as the hero of this story. Not because he had done anything extraordinary, but because he had done something fundamentally right. He had treated himself with the respect that Denise Welch had refused to give him. Denise Welch, meanwhile, had shown what happens when ego and entitlement override basic human decency. She had had a chance to interview one of the greatest actors of our time. She had squandered that opportunity by choosing to be cruel instead of curious. Dismissive instead of respectful. The moment when Ian removed his microphone and placed it on the table would be remembered as one of the most powerful gestures in daytime television history. It was such a simple action, yet it spoke volumes. It said, "I will not participate in this anymore. I value myself too much to stay." And with that gesture, Ian McKellen had reminded everyone watching that no interview, no show, no opportunity is worth sacrificing your dignity for. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away with your head held high. The cameras had captured it all, every uncomfortable moment, every dismissive comment from Denise, every attempt by the other panelists to salvage the interview. The look on Ian's face as he realized this was not going to be the respectful conversation he had hoped for. The moment of decision when he chose to leave. The thunderous applause that followed. It all existed now as a record of what happened when someone forgot that every person deserves respect. When someone decided that their platform gave them permission to be cruel. When someone valued entertainment over empathy and ratings over basic human kindness. Back in the dressing room, Ian was gathering his belongings. A production assistant knocked gently on the door. "Mr. McKellen, I just wanted to say I am so sorry about what happened out there. You were treated terribly and you handled it with such grace." Ian looked up and smiled kindly at her. "Thank you, dear. That is very thoughtful of you. Please do not worry about me. I have been in this business long enough to know that not every experience will be a positive one. The important thing is how we respond to difficult situations." The production assistant felt tears spring to her eyes. "You showed us all how to respond with dignity. I will never forget watching you stand up for yourself like that." "Well," Ian said softly, "I hope you remember this if you ever find yourself in a similar situation. You deserve respect. Everyone does. And if someone cannot give you that basic courtesy, you have every right to walk away." Meanwhile, back on the set after the show had ended, Janet, Carol, and Kay sat together in stunned silence. Denise had left immediately after the cameras stopped rolling, not bothering to speak to any of them. "I cannot believe that just happened," Kay said quietly, her voice still shaking. "I mean, I have worked with Denise for years, and I have never seen her be that deliberately cruel to a guest." Carol shook her head. "It was not just cruel, it was calculated. She knew exactly what she was doing. Every comment about his age, every dismissive gesture, every interruption. She was trying to provoke him." Janet clenched her fists. "The thing that makes me most angry is that we tried to—" "Stop it. We tried so many times to redirect the conversation, to give Ian a chance to talk about his work, but she just kept going. It was like she wanted to humiliate him." "What do we do now?" Kay asked. "I do not know if I can continue working with someone who behaves like that. Ian McKellen deserves so much better than what he got today." The three women sat in silence, knowing that this incident would have lasting consequences for all of them. The show they had worked on for years had been damaged by one person's inability to show basic respect to a guest. In the control room, the producer was on the phone with network executives. His voice was tense as he tried to explain what had happened. "Yes, I understand the seriousness of the situation. Ian McKellen walked off our set during a live broadcast because our host repeatedly insulted him. The audience gave him a standing ovation as he left. Yes, a standing ovation. They were clearly on his side. He listened for a moment, then continued. The other panelists tried to intervene multiple times. They distanced themselves from Denise's behavior on air. They even joined the standing ovation. This is not just about one uncomfortable moment. This is about a pattern of disrespectful behavior that culminated in losing one of the most respected actors in the world." The audience members leaving the studio were still talking about what they had witnessed. One woman turned to her husband and said, "I have so much more respect for Ian McKellen after seeing that. He could have shouted. He could have been nasty back to her. But he just calmly explained why her behavior was wrong and left. That takes real strength." Her husband nodded. "And did you see Denise's face? She genuinely seemed surprised that there were consequences to her actions. Like she thought she could just say whatever she wanted and everyone would go along with it. The incident would be discussed for weeks, months, even years to come. It would be analyzed and debated. People would write articles about it, create videos about it, use it as an example in discussions about respect and boundaries and how to handle conflict. But at the heart of all those discussions would be the same simple truth. Ian McKellen had shown what it means to maintain your dignity in the face of disrespect. He had demonstrated that you do not have to accept poor treatment just because someone has a microphone or a platform. He thought about the young production assistant who had thanked him. He hoped his actions had shown her and others watching that it is okay to stand up for yourself, that you do not have to endure mistreatment in silence, that walking away is sometimes the bravest and most powerful choice you can make. Tomorrow he would return to rehearsals for King Lear. He would immerse himself in the text, in the character, in the work that had sustained him for 6 decades. And this uncomfortable incident would fade into the background. Just one difficult day in a long and extraordinary career. But for Denise Welch, the impact of this day would be much harder to shake off. She had revealed something fundamental about her character, and that revelation had been broadcast for all to see. The question now was whether she would learn from this experience or continue to believe that she had done nothing wrong. The studio was empty now. The lights were dimmed. The cameras were turned off. But the memory of what had happened would linger in that space. Every time a guest sat in that chair, every time a host asked a question, there would be an invisible reminder of the day when Ian McKellen chose dignity over discomfort and walked away from a situation that did not serve him. And perhaps that was the most important legacy of this incident. Not the controversy or the headlines or the debates, but the simple, powerful reminder that every person, regardless of their age or status or any other factor, deserves to be treated with respect. And when that respect is withheld, they have every right to walk away.